What's up, guys? Today's video I'm going to be covering the custom parking brake cables for the axle swap of my 93 K1500 Suburban. If you watched our first video, you'll know that on this old 93 Suburban we went ahead and put in an AAM 9.76 inch rear axle, and that came out of a 2015 Escalade, and it's all in there and routed good. So now what we got to do is get the parking brake cables sorted out. You can see there's a bracket provision already on the axle, and then what I've got to do is get it to bite into this hook here, which will actuate the drum brake in the head of the rotor here. So they don't make any parking brake cables that are the right length for what I need, so here's how I did it. So first things first, I had to find a cable that was correct for the ends and spring and stuff for the rear axle. So I have a part number for you here. It is right there. And this parking brake cable is just way too long. And it's intentionally too long because it's going to allow us to cut it to length. And I'll show you how and why that's going to work. So basically, we're going to leave this end untouched. This is the end that goes in that provision in the axle. The spring kind of pushes that arm back. And then this little loop is what hooks on the parking brake cable. Or the parking brake arm. So we're going to leave that end totally normal. And then what we're going to have to do is pull this end off of the external sheathing. We'll cut the sheathing. Obviously, we'll have the internal cable removed at that point, and we're going to cut the internal cable and then crimp on a ferrule at the end at the appropriate length. These are just plastic ends, and they're just kind of pressed on to the end of this cable here. If you pull on them pretty good, I've got one right here, they just come off. And you can see there, I just scraped out a little bit of the epoxy in there, and then that's going to go into the frame. So for my K1500 specifically, it had a different kind of weird style equalizer. So I just went to the junkyard and picked one of these up. I think this was off a Ford pickup, like an F-Series pickup, but then they've also got ones from like Jeeps and Dodges and stuff like this. But essentially, I'll take you over and show you on the side of the truck what this is going to look like. So this is all the original cable from the parking brake. Goes through to the frame, and then there's a connector right here. And then this is just an intermediate cable I got online. It's like 32 inches or something like that. That one was pre-crimped already at the right length. So we'll drop a part number for that. But how this goes is that cable end right there is going to go into here. And the equalizer is going to sit like this. And then it's got adjustment for me here so I can take a little bit of slack out of the parking brake cables. And on your K-Series trucks, you've got these like provisions in the frame here. And there's two of them. And then so I'm just going to have it go from the parking brake on this side, route the cable, parking brake on that side, route the cable, and then cut it at the appropriate length. And it should be good to go. So the holes for these are like 540 thousandths, I believe. The bottom hole is already the correct size. So that brown piece that I pulled off and showed you should just slide right in there. The top hole is the wrong size. You can see it's way too big for that. So all I did was just 3D print a spacer like this. The IAED for that hole in the middle is 540. And then the OD is correct, and it's got little retaining tabs there. You can see the little bumps on it. So all that does is go into the frame, snaps in, and then boom, these cables are going to go in and press against that. It's kind of like a press instead of a pull, so that should be fine. So you can see here on the driver's side, I'm kind of figuring out the right cable length. What I'm going to do essentially is route the cable how I want it. So I don't have the internal cable on here, but obviously we'll get all that hooked up, get the cable in, figure out where I want to put it, and then I'll probably do a little weld-on bracket onto the axle here just to hold the cable in place, route it how I want it, and then cut this cable, re-glue on that round piece, get the internal cable cut to the appropriate length to go to here, and then crimp on the cable ends. Honestly, cutting this part and gluing on that brown snap ferrule or whatever is going to be super easy. And I'll show you really quick how I plan to do the cable ends. I've been practicing. I came up with a method, that I think is pretty cool. All right, so over here on the bench, how we're going to make the cable ends is once the internal cable is pulled out and removed, it's got like a nylon sheathing on it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is cut it, whatever, at the appropriate length, remove some of that nylon sheathing with a razor blade or whatever you got. And then that'll leave you just with like the raw strands of the cable. So just this is 1/8 inch cable, measure yours, but it's just 1/8 inch raw steel. And then the tools you're going to need are just a hacksaw. These are battery terminal crimpers. You're also going to need copper rod stock. Again, I got this from Amazon. I think it was $7 for 8 inches of it. This is 3/8. Measure your end, get the appropriate size, 5/16, whatever you need. You'll need a drill bit that's the same size as the cable. And then some solder, some flux, a torch, and then like a bucket, like a cap, steel pipe cap or something that you can fill with solder, because you're going to heat it up with the torch and dunk the end of the copper in. But essentially what we do is I put this in the drill chuck, and then I took the file, and as the drill was running, I just kind of chamfered the edge initially, and that gave me just like a nice radius on this ferrule that we're making. And then if you don't need a radius and you just want a sharp corner, you can leave it. I wanted the radius for that equalizer, so this could pivot a little bit. But anyway, I put the radius on the bar, and then I took it out, put it in the vise. I marked the right length for this. This is just a 1/2 inch long, and then cut it with the hacksaw. So then what I was left with was just a solid 1/2 inch long cylinder like this with the rounded edge. The next thing I did was put this in the vise, center punch it, and then hit it with the 1/8 inch drill. Right down the middle there. Use lots of oil. The copper's kind of gummy, so take your time. Just use like little pecks. And then once you got that set up, I just put a little chamfer on both ends, and then you're pretty much ready to go. So once that's all set up, you have the cable, you double check the length and everything. Everything looks good. Put the ferrule on the end of your cable, and then throw it in the crimper. Boom. Squish it down. And then that's like on there. It's on there pretty good. You can see the crimp marks on it here, and probably that would be fine for most cases. But for added insurance, what I'm going to do, I got these, whatever, pot, cap, whatever you got. I melt the solder in there, and then dip the crimped end in the flux, dip that into the molten solder, and then I hit it with a little wire brush, and it cleaned up really nice. And that just gets the solder in the internal cavity of the crimp. If there's any space in there, it'll fill it. It wets into the individual strands of the wire and just fills it in there. So that's just added insurance for your wire crimp there. That's the rundown on what we're doing and how we're going to do it. I'm going to actually do one now and show you how I make it and crimp it and stuff like that. So stay tuned and we'll get to it. All right, so here we are. We'll get started on the passenger side. So I got that parking brake cable that's way too long. What I'm going to start with is just pulling this end off of the sheath here. I was able to get it by hand on the other one. We'll see if I get lucky on this one too. Just kind of twisted it. Maybe not. Let's get a little pry tool on it. There we go. Obviously, we're going to keep that. And then this gives you a good look on the internal makeup of the cable here. So you got that rubber outer shroud on it, and then like a steel coiled on the inside there. And that's what we're going to cut to the appropriate length. So that's all good there. What we're going to do now is just cut the cable here. And I'm just going to cut it close to the cable stop on the end here. And then now you can pull out that internal cable, place that aside because we're going to want to keep that. You're going to want to keep this guy too. Mine, on the first one I pulled off, had a little rubber stuck on the inside. Looks like this one does too. So off camera, I'll just get in there with a pick or a screwdriver or something. Pick away at that until it's clean on the inside. Then we'll epoxy it back on the cable end. Now that we got this set up, I'm going to take this over to the truck and route it how I want it. And then I'll mark the cable here, and then we'll cut it and go from there. All right, we're at the axle here, and I got my cable with me. I'm going to start getting it routed how I want it. And once it's kind of roughly where I want it, I'll go ahead and just snap that plastic end in there. You can see we got that set up where we want it. And then the cable's running over there. We're going to hop over to the other side of the truck. See, we got the axle right there. The brake is going over. I'll probably tie it into that top bracket that I already have there. And I'm going to route it through this loop in the frame right here into the frame here with that provision that I 3D printed. And then that's going to be good for us. So I'm going to leave that kind of mocked up how it is. I'm going to get the cable routed. And then what I'm going to do is mark both of these. We're going to cut them and then put those ends on so that way we can get the appropriate length for the internal cables. All right, I got it routed pretty much how I want it. There's this bracket that's on the cable already. So what I'm going to do is make a little tab that can screw into, and then I'll weld that. I'll just tack that onto the axle there. And then I got this top bracket that I made already, and I'll just add a provision so that it can hold the cable like that. And then it's just going to run up and into the frame there. Driver's side was a little bit easier. I'm just going to make one bracket, and that'll hold it to the axle there, and then it's a straight shot to that frame bracket there. So let me make those really quick, tack them up, and we'll bring you back. And for the bracket design, what I'm using is just some of this 1/8 inch steel, mild steel that I had lying around. This is the bracket that came off one of the parking brake cables, and I just marked the hole on it there. What I'm going to do is just put in a 1/4 inch rib nut. So if you haven't seen these before, you just kind of crush them in there with the rib nut tool, and it puts a threaded insert in it. So I'm going to have those in there. I'm going to cut this down the middle and cut it there, and then I'll have 2 mounting tabs, and then 1/4 inch bolt will go through the middle, hold these on, and because there's a little leg there, that should stop it from twisting, and that'll hold it in place. So I'll zip this here, zip that there. I'll probably just radius it so it matches the axle, and then we'll get those tacked up. All right, there we go. We got the parking brake cables in. You can see the tabs got welded to the axle right there. The routing looks pretty good. So we got those 2 cables marked there. You can see the white paint line at the appropriate lengths. So we're going to go ahead and cut those off with the cutoff wheel here. And I'll clean out the holes, make sure there's no debris in there. And then once they're cut, we'll go ahead and feed the cables through and then glue in these snap ends. Cables are cut to length, ferrule is glued on the end. You can see the internal cable is way too long. That's intentional, so what we're going to do is mount it on the vehicle, get those into frame mounts, and then we're going to cut the cable to length, we'll mark it, and then crimp on our copper ferrule. Alright, we got the cables routed how we like them, and they're going into the frame here. There's those 2 frame holes with a 3D printed adapter holding up, and you can see I just got 2 springs holding the equalizer to help me out here. So we got the cables routed through the middle, and then what we're going to do is just hold that equalizer vertical, and then I'm going to hit it with the paint marker, and then that way we're going to know where we need to cut these and then crimp on the ends. So once we get those measurements, we'll bring it back to the vise and start crimping. Alright, cables are marked and got them in the vise now, so that line right there is where we're going to cut it. Got the ferrules made up already, so these are a 1/2 inch long, so what I'm going to do is just put it on the cable there and go a 1/2 inch above my line, which was at like the seat of the equalizer bar. We'll take the cutoff wheel and just cut the cable and strip the outer sheathing, and that should be good to go there. So we'll get this cut and then get that crimped on. Alright, cables are crimped and soldered and routed in their final location. Going into the equalizer bar here, and you can see there's a little bit of slack in it. That's fine. You can see I took the measurement all the way at the end of the adjustment position there. So I'll just tighten that nut down and it should be good to go. Now for the parking brake cables, this frame ear is a little bit too thick for the ferrule to snap into place. So I'm just going to file the teeth on that a little bit so that it snaps in on the lower position. And I have a question for guys that have these trucks or rear axles in their builds. You can see on the rear cable end there, it's got kind of a slit or a notch in it. And then there's also that threaded hole right there. So I'm curious if there's supposed to be a retaining clip or something like that to hold that end in there, because it kind of wobbles around a little bit. So I'll make one if I can't find one, but if there's a part number, that would be great. So let me take the slack out of this cable and then we'll give the e-brake a shot. Here we go, we got all the tension taken out. Just brought that nut up on the adjuster bar there. And you can see right now, axle spinning freely. So there's enough tension on it to pull the pedal up in the cab, but not too much that the brakes are engaged. And if we push that thing down, it goes about halfway down, not nearly as much as it used to do with the old drum brakes, which is nice. Now you can see that thing's really locked in. It's pulled down there. It's got good actuation on both sides. And if you try and move that axle, really stepping on it there, nothing happens. So this worked out really good. None of the cable ends pulled out. So what I'm going to do is let this sit under tension overnight so that the cables stretch out a little bit. I'll readjust the nut on the equalizer bar, and then this thing's good to go. So hopefully this helped you guys. Let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.